Hello and welcome to this pre-recorded webinar exploring the results and implications of the PRCA's PR and Communications Census in partnership with Vulio. I'm Koray Kamgoz, Director of Communications and Marketing, and I'm very pleased to be joined by two industry leaders today to dissect the results of the study. Michelle Goodhall is the CMO at Access Intelligence Group. Her portfolio of software brands for the marketing and communications industries includes Vulio, a leading media intelligence platform with monitoring, insight, engagement, and evaluation tools; Pulsar, an advanced social listening and audience intelligence platform; and ResponseSource, the network that connects media and influencers to the resources they need. Formerly, she was head of marketing at community and messaging platform Guild, and prior to that, she was a consultant with clients including Locog, Viacom, DirectLine, and VNA. Francis Ingham is the Director General of the PRCA and Chief Executive of ECO. His background is in politics and public affairs, having previously worked for the Conservative Party and the Confederation of British Industry. He sits on the UK Government Communication Service Strategy and Evaluation Council and leads the membership body for UK Local Government Communicators, LG Comms. He was external examiner to the American University at Richmond and visiting lecturer at the University of Westminster. So before we dive into today's discussion, I just thought it'd be useful to have a quick bit of background on the research itself. So the census was conducted by Norstat, and it gathered the views of more than 1,200 PR professionals across the UK. It was published back in December last year, and it looks at everything from industry demographics to salaries, diversity, and social mobility. So we initially went into the field in March last year, pre-COVID, and by the time it came to publish the results of the study, it was clear that the world and indeed the industry had moved on significantly since then. So we decided to go back out into the field in October, and the result is data from two separate surveys and what we feel is quite a compelling look at how the pandemic has impacted the PR industry. So that's just a little bit about the research, and I thought it would be interesting. I know from previous census data, we know that the industry was estimated to be worth around about 15.7 billion. I mean, it has quite clearly shrunk significantly since then. But to start with, I'd be interested to find out when you both think we'll be returning to growth and profitability. Francis, perhaps if I could start with you on that first.
Sure, thanks. If I could give my own little bit of context, if that's all right. We've been publishing this piece of research for a dozen years now, and it's always been really easy to write the foreword to it, frankly. It's sort of written itself. It's always been another year of growth, both in terms of value and in terms of number of practitioners. It's always been success stories, and it's just sort of been comparators between success stories. So which sector is growing faster than the other one? And it's contained challenges within it, the gender pay gap, the makeup of the industry in terms of background, people working too long, and all those sorts of things. But it's always been a positive news story. And the last publication was obviously very, very different. And that's a source of regret, obviously. But in my view, and I'm doing calls every day with agency and in-house leaders, both in the UK and around the world. In my view, we're already back to growth. I would say that around 2/3 of our members use the furlough program, half our members, and that really saved them in many cases. Half our members made redundancies, but I would say roughly half our members are recruiting again. So there's growth happening already, despite this next lockdown that we're all in that seems like Groundhog Day. And in terms of profitability, actually we are definitely there. I think the majority of agencies in particular were so effective at cutting overhead, albeit with government support, that they are back into the black. For many, last year was a brutal, horrible year, and I'd say the same is true for us. But growth is returning, profitability is returning, and I've said I think 2021 will be a year of very considerable growth indeed, actually.
Michelle, would you agree with that assertion? Is that what you're seeing on your end as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, would back it up that, last year was all about the sector that you worked in. So those working in online retail, tech, digital and healthcare, it was a much happier story than those working in hospitality, travel, culture, and also things like events as well. And like Francis, anecdotally, those agencies that I spoke to who had a diverse client portfolio, they fared much better than those focusing on the sectors that were hardest hit. And I think one of the things certainly that we're seeing is comms and marketing recruiters are often really good bellwethers for where there's growth and also hunger for talent as well. You and I were on a PRCA panel together on the 20th of January, where Rowan Shah from Reuben Sinclair talked about how buoyant technology, finance and healthcare were. And actually, coming from the technology sector, I can see that, actively there's lots of recruitment and also lots of interest, and definitely, lots of work being briefed out to different agencies across marketing and communications. And again, I think one of the good things that we need to look at is stats and indicators from other sectors as well. So the Advertising Association WARC expenditure report expects that the UK's advertising spend is to grow by over 15% this year. And that's hopeful. That's an upgrade from the last forecast, which was done in October 2020. So their forecasts in terms of advertising and advertising budgets show that this year will be all about accelerated growth. And actually there's projections that ad spend in 2021 will be higher than the previous high of 25.37 billion, which was recorded in 2019. So if spend in advertising and forecasting around that is, potentially an indicator for the comms and the PR sector, then this is really, really hopeful and a really hopeful indicator.
That was, sorry, go on, Francis.
Just to add to that, you used the word bellwether, Michelle, and there was the IPA bellwether report as well very recently, comparing different sectors, so advertising, general marketing, events and so on, showing that our industry, PR, was outperforming all of those. And equally, we've been surveying our members throughout this. You had an immediate crash in confidence when it all began, of course, as we all had that shock of this staggering new reality. But our members have been pretty upbeat the whole way through, really. And once they realised that they could survive, and I should say, sadly, some of them didn't, and that is a tragedy in each individual case. And we tried to help individuals and companies as much as we could during that period. But if you learned you could survive, then actually you could see a way forward, and you can see that way forward to recovery, growth, new profitability. And I think we're reasonably close to that point now.
Yeah, it's certainly very encouraging to hear you both say that. And Michelle, that report that came out from the Advertising Association, I think, did give the industry a shot in the arm at a really crucial period, and it showed that we are actually in a really good place to move forward from here. Just before we move on, a lot's been said actually about public relations ability to be effective in this environment, and in many cases outperform other creative disciplines. I know that Martin Sorrell, who joined the World PR Summit organised by ECO last year, was quite clear that PR had outperformed similar industries. Just interested to hear both of your views on why you think that is, and what is it about our practice that means we're so well placed to weather this storm? Michelle, perhaps if I could start with you.
So this is really interesting. I mean, I remember probably about 15, maybe even 20 years ago, listening to Rory Sutherland for the first time ever. And apologies to bring, an advertising great back into the conversation, but he said something that really stuck with me. So I just joined a consumer PR agency and was heading up their digital function. And he talked about how it was the time for PR. It's a time for PR. And actually, if you really sort of think about that, what Rory was suggesting is essentially what has happened to the advertising industry. And that is, it has really drawn upon, I think, the very best of what we do as an industry. And that is to understand that our audiences are not one big homogenous mass, that actually we are groups of publics, that in order to be able to resonate with a story or a message, you have to really build a narrative, and you have to deeply understand what makes people tick, what makes them connect, and actually what makes them want to share through their networks and communities as well. And I think the reality in terms of why comms and PR does so well is because actually we don't have necessarily the luxury of the big budgets in order to be able to do all of the forecasting and the brand testing and the brand narrative testing. A lot of it comes from a gut feel of what works when you put it through a sort of a third party, a kind of a filter essentially that is that you have to go through before reaching your publics and your audiences. And every time I think about that, I go back to what Rory said those 15-20 years ago, which is it's an understanding, it's a nuanced understanding of people and their needs and what we can do to make them think, feel and do things differently.
Yeah. Artis, would you agree with that?
I would, and that's very eloquently put. I'll put it in more prosaic, boring terms, I suppose, because I can't compete with that analysis. In the Eco World Report, which is the sort of international equivalent of the PRCA Census, we've asked people for years what's driving growth, and they've always had the same top answers, really. Growth of digital, PR being more nimble, PR in particular regarding advertising, PR companies offering a wide range of services than they used to do, self-help blending, disciplines, and chief execs investing more in corporate reputation. And all of those trends have been accelerated during this period, because in a period where you have only really had communications as a means of engaging with your customers or your stakeholders or your voters for that matter, the absolutely central role of comms and PR has become really apparent. I wouldn't name the people who've got it wrong, but we can all think of the companies who've got it really wrong during this period. Their reputation has been hammered as a result, and it's had a material impact on their bottom line. And that's one of the reasons why I'm confident about this year and about future years. So I don't think any of those trends, of those changes, are going to go away. They've all been cemented into reality now. And it was put very well to me by one of our members a few days ago. She said that so long as you could hit the pause button and still be around to unpause at the end of this horrible period, you were going to be not just okay, you had a really bright future ahead of you. And I think that's true on an individual and on an organizational level. And I think it's true on an industry-wide level too.
Yeah, I'd agree, and I think that's an interesting way of putting it. I'd like to move on to mental health, because that was one of the key findings from the census research. And according to the results, the number of PR professionals saying they experienced poor mental health rose from 35% in March to 39% in October, which is, I'm sure you'd agree, quite unsurprising given the seismic change that was occurring around the world. What can we do to stop that trend rising further in 2021? Michelle, if I could start with you, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, I think like everybody else, I personally don't think I know a single person who isn't struggling or hasn't struggled with their mental health. And, we know all of the reasons. It's family, friends, balancing work life, the demands of young kids, money worries, losing your job, or just that sort of feeling of things spiraling completely out of our own control. And I think what's interesting in our sector is that, as individuals, we're human beings and social beings, and we're not built to be kept away from others. Zooms and Teams and all of those things are great, but actually, being in physical proximity of somebody is just needed. It's a kind of a human need. And I think also the comms industry attracts a really high number of naturally social and gregarious people who really flourish in those situations as well. Now, in terms of what we can do, I mean, there is obviously a role for ensuring that we keep well-being top of mind. So on the Vulio blog, for example, for the last couple of years, we've actually tried to publish a lot of well-being content and support specifically for comms professionals, but we've really stepped that up even more over the last year. So we've got people like mental health specialists providing advice about actually logging off from work and making sure that you don't have the constant updates from your phone and pings from Teams, etc. And I think importantly, it's about highlighting and showing what agencies are actually doing to help their colleagues. So Hallam, for example, have a mental health first aider program in place. They had a number of their employees trained by the Samaritans, so they can actually offer confidential chats to team members who might be struggling. And MRM has got their pro fitness and mobility and nutritional program as well to support mental and physical wellness and health while working from home. I think personally, and I'll shut up in a minute, where I found kind of strength is in lots of different communities. So I would include that the PRCA's guild communities. Stephen Waddington runs a brilliant Facebook group and a community there, but also non-communications groups, friends, family, you know, my choir as well, people who sort of support you and cheer you on in many ways. I think what has stood out for me, certainly within comms people within the communities, is just how many people are individually offering help, support, a friendly ear, a cup of tea, and it will be great to see this continue as we come out of this. I'm in no way a specialist around mental health, but I think there are some really important things that we all need to continue, and that is to make sure that we're being empathic, that we recognise that everyone's struggling in their own way. I can't even imagine how I would deal with this as a 23-year-old party animal locked indoors for months. And I think we need to think about our different colleagues in different ways. Corey, you have young kids. Putting myself in your shoes is really important as well. And I think it's important that we flip it every way that we can. I think also the thing is making sure that you continue to communicate with your teammates and your colleagues and really ask them how they feel and be prepared to support them when they say actually not great. And, you know, from a personal perspective and from people that I see around me as well, just really be careful with yourself. It's impossible to do everything. And it's really important that we take the pressure off ourselves and you know, people in a leadership role take the pressure off individuals and ensure that they're doing non-work stuff, that they're, you know, seeking outlets to take some joy from this situation.
Yeah, I think that's an incredibly important point, Michelle. Francis, have you any thoughts on what we could do to stop that trend from increasing this year?
Yeah, let me take a step back. You know, that 39% figure, I'm sure it's a lot higher now,
yeah,
honestly. I think everyone is struggling during this period. Let me do the negative and then the positive and then the practical, if I remember that order. The negative, it's a brutal period for everybody. You know, it's terrible if you are at the beginning of your career and you're trying to work from a flat or house share. You're working from your bedroom, or you're taking it in turns to use the Wi-Fi, or taking it in turns to sit at the kitchen table. I mean, that's no way to begin a career. Really isn't. It's brutal if you're running an organization. And I say this as someone who does just the burden of getting things right, of realizing, you know, the number of people who get paid at the end of every month, and you've got to have the money in the bank to do so. And I think I've said publicly, maybe I haven't, at our worst point as an organization, we had 5 weeks of running cost in the bank left, and then we would have closed down as a company. And that was a bloody awful period. And then for everybody in the middle, just trying to deliver more frequently with fewer colleagues, they're on furlough, or they've been made redundant, or they're sick. You know, I mean, we've had people go under with COVID during this period, like everybody else has. It's been a rotten period, and I think anyone who says they haven't suffered during this is either lying or very strange. And I certainly have, and I'm unaware of anybody who hasn't. On the positive side, It's no longer taboo to talk about having problems and about struggling. And it's no longer unusual for bosses to ask their employees how they're doing, and to do so in a way where they actually want an honest answer, and frankly, the other way around as well. I mean, the number of my colleagues whom I've spoken with directly when I thought they'd been a bit down, never would have done that previously, being perfectly honest. And they felt able to ask me, how are you doing, boss? They never would have done that, or they wouldn't have expected an honest answer. Anyway, I said, oh, just fine. Like everyone says, oh, just fine. But nobody says just fine any longer, really, and that's great. So I hope this taboo about talking about mental health has gone. And that's one of the positive things here. And in terms of practical stuff, you know, there are loads of tools out there. We've put together mental health toolkits and so on, and we've made them available for the industry as a whole, and plenty of people have contributed and volunteered, and I just don't think that will change. It is a really good thing. It's got to get through just another few months, and then hopefully we can get back to happier days, and that includes human contact, and not 4 or 5 days a week in the office, but a couple of days a week in the office, and a lot more working remotely and saving ourselves the stress of a daily commute and all that sort of thing that we now realise isn't actually necessary. Probably wasn't ever.
Yeah, I think that's very well put. We took some research into account last year in partnership with Opinium. It's a separate study from the Census, and it was really interesting to compare the results of that with the previous year, because there was a significant jump in the number of respondents who were saying that they were comfortable being honest about taking time off for mental health with their employers, and there'd been a really significant increase. I think it was about 30% over a year. So it does show that the conversations that we're having are really helping to break that taboo and normalizing conversations in the workplace about mental health, which I think we can all agree is a really important thing. I'm conscious that we've got quite a few more questions to get through. So I'd like to move the discussion on to diversity, and particularly ethnicity. The data from the Census showed that 9 out of 10 managing directors identify as white British. I'm sure you'll both be familiar. This is a problem which has stubbornly bothered the industry for a number of years, and I think there's now a renewed impetus to change it. But I'm really interested to get both of your views on what you think can be done to support really the hiring and the promotion of diverse professionals in leadership roles. Francis, would you like to kick us off on that?
Sure. So, yeah, we've identified this as an issue for a long time, both on a moral point of view, but also on a pragmatic point of view, business point of view. It is harder to communicate with people if you come from a very different background to them and you really don't understand their attitudes. And a lot of that is built into one's background, education, colour, frankly, gender. And we've tried over the years to address this as an organisation. And I say also as an industry, I don't think there has been an unwillingness to address it as employers. It's, if we're honest with ourselves, just never really been a top priority of employers in the large, by and large, really. I think last year changed that for live events that we all saw both in the UK, the US, and around the world. And there's a renewed determination to address the problems that our industry has. I mean, we set up our race and ethnicity equity board to help do that. We changed the composition of our own board as well, because, and I put my hands up at the time, I had always been so focused on achieving a gender balance on our board that I've been blind to some of the other imbalances. And we took decisive action to address that. We published our own race and ethnicity pay gap. numbers, just as we used to publish, just as we published years ago our gender pay gap and continue to do so. And just as with the gender pay gap, the ethnicity pay gap data makes for uncomfortable reading for us, for me personally. But we need to set an example. I believe our members ought to follow that example, and many of them do. We need role models that we don't have enough of at the moment. And I think one of the fundamental problems of our industry, from speaking with a lot of people, it isn't recruiting from a diverse background, really. It's keeping people in the industry. There are too many people from minority backgrounds who leave our industry early on. And we need better to understand why that is, rather than just shrugging and saying, well, we gave it a go and it wasn't for them. So that's the way I look at it. But I try to be realistic but positive in everything facing our industry, really. And the realistic element is we've got a problem and it's deep-seated, and attempts to change it haven't worked for a long time. But the positive element is there is an appetite for change, UK, globally, and I think last year was a defining moment of change for our industry. Let's just keep at it, keep on it, not let go of it as an issue, and keep on tracking how we're progressing with it. And when we set up REEB, our Race and Ethnicity Equity Board, we said, hold us to account, feel free to speak the truth. If you think we're failing, say that we're failing. Don't just say we're failing to us privately, go out and say it publicly. It'll hurt us, but it's the right thing to do. That's my point of view.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think a lot of the challenges this year are about capitalizing on that momentum that caught on last year and really ensuring that it translates into tangible action and change. And Michelle, have you any views on this issue and how we can really drive positive change in the area?
Yeah, and again, I'm sort of bringing a slightly different perspective as well. I mean, of course, the census does show that ethnic diversity is the area that really does urgently need addressing. But actually, there are a number of marketing, design, digital, creative agencies who are also doing exactly the same thing, looking deeply at diversity and inclusion and overhauling their understanding, but also their hiring practices as well. And there have been positive steps. Clearly it's really, really, fantastic, the momentum that is there, but we need to move, this year from talking about diversity into action, and actually action over a sustained period of time. And I think, just again, framing it against leadership and the results in the survey, one of the most depressing websites that you can ever look at is The Colour of Power. And I don't know if you've seen this, but it shows that 51 out of 1,097 of the most powerful leadership roles in the UK are held by people from ethnic minorities, and that's not moved for 3 years. So the ambition is not just for the comms industry, but also all elements of and sectors of society as well, to really push ethnic diversity into leadership roles. Now, in terms of what's happening and the things and the momentum that's being made, what I really loved in 2020 were a lot of programs actually by people in leadership roles who were actually pulling up others with them. So Advita Patel and Priya Bates, for example, launching their A Leader Like Me program to support and empower women of colour to become business leaders, board members and CEOs. And there's more of this stuff that's out there, and really change is about acknowledging that there's a problem in your organisation that you want to change, and also you want to try and educate yourself about the issues there as well. So like you guys, we launched a platform, Access Matters, last year to encourage sharing experiences, learning from best practice diversity initiatives, and also featuring some of these programs as well, to get people into leadership roles from diverse sectors. So I think the important thing as an organisation is that you look at every single hire as an opportunity to improve your diversity and its potential to succeed. Bring in experts if you need to. There are so many people out there who can help you develop a plan for hiring diverse leaders. And you do need to change culture within the workplace. You need to acknowledge where you've been and state where you go. And those diversity goals must be stated clearly and, if possible, publicly as well. And longer term, it's important to evidence and show the positive results of diverse leadership, and make it a no-brainer, not just within comms, but across the UK in positions of power and roles of power.
Yeah,
can I add one thing on that?
Sure.
If that's right. I was looking down at my phone, not to answer a message, but to find something.
The colour of power. Yeah.
Earlier on. No, it wasn't that, but I'll do that after this call. There was a piece of research by a polling company that came out last week about the proportion of pupils in England starting higher education by age 19 in 2018 and 2019. And it breaks it down by all, but also by those claiming free school meals. And the breakdown is so fascinating. So 79% of Asian Chinese 19-year-old pupils will have started in higher education. 48% of Black Caribbean, for example, 40% of white British, 6% of Gypsy Roma. And, you look at it and think these variances are sophisticated, they're deep, they've been around for a very long time. And all of the goodwill of governments and employers over the years to address them have been marginal in their impact on this. And so I think that there's a renewed determination in the industry to address it. We need to look at opportunity and where people end up in the round, because, and not just on our own, it's not in isolation. Let's be realistic. It's by no means the PR industry alone having an issue here. It's society and economy across the whole piece. And and in that regard, we should learn from other industries and what they're doing right now as well.
Yeah, but I think the opportunity for the PR industry is to communicate the impact of that change. Do it ourselves and then communicate that impact of change, because we'll take other people along with us.
Yeah, I'd agree with that entirely, Michelle, and also communicate the fact that this is a marathon and not a sprint. This is not something that can be solved overnight. It's going to take a lot of hard work and effort. I was listening to our workshop yesterday on the ethnicity pay gap, and one of the panelists said, it's taken generations for this culture to establish itself, and for that reason alone, it's not going to be an overnight project to break down the systems that are in place and promote equality throughout the industry. So I think that's something that is worth bearing in mind. I'm conscious of time, so before we wrap up, I just wondered if I could ask each of you to share what you believe will be the biggest challenge and perhaps the biggest opportunity as well facing the PR professionals around the world this year. Michelle, could I start with you on that one?
And I don't think there's a single challenge. I think it's everything that we discussed: mental health, as Francis said, career progression, when you're not sitting with people and you can, pull and extract and, model behaviors and knowledge from them as well. Keeping track of your team, making sure that there's consistency in your communications as well. What we've seen from many of our public sector clients in particular is that they have had to really rely on technology solutions to kind of see what each other are doing. So, press office tools, for example, and management tools to make sure that things are consistent across the board. So, I think it is everything that we've said, just all of the continued challenges around remote working and not being in one place, together and collectively.
Thank you, Michelle. Francis?
What can I add to that? Challenge-wise, just getting through the fatigue that has set in within our industry after close on a year of that pause button being on, and a lockdown that was supposed to be 2 weeks, having multiplied it so many times. And that's not unique to our industry, of course, but I know that there are plenty within PR and comms who are absolutely burned out over this period. And that'll be a big challenge this year for employers, employees, all of us, really. In terms of opportunity, Well, like I say, it's proved this horrible period has proved the centrality of comms to every organisation. We need to keep the wins, if you look at it that way, that we have made. The fact chief execs listen to the advice their comms people give them rather more seriously than they did before. The greater number of people at the top table, all of those dynamics that I mentioned that the eco report has shown over the years being accelerated. And just, you know, the renewed growth that we can expect this year. And the other positive, of course, is embedding some of those good changes around talking about mental health and not slogging in and out of trains and underground buses all the time. Those are some of the good things that have come out of this.
Yeah, I think we can all agree on that. So I think that brings us to an end. Michelle and Francis, thank you both very much for your time. I found that really interesting. I'm sure our audience will as well. To our audience tuning in, you can download the report, the PR and Communication Census in partnership with Vulio on our website. Thank you very much for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you.